This, to put it bluntly, is a weed. Hey folks, this is Casey and I am One Mellow Marigold, and this week we are talking about everyone's #1 gardening foe, weeds. And not the fun kind of weeds either, okay? That's another time and channel. Anyway, first we're going to talk about what is a weed. Who gets to decide? Then we're going to identify like 4 or 5 different common types of weeds you might find in your garden. And we'll revisit the age-old discussion of prevention. Mulch or polycover, pros and cons of each. Yeah, let's talk about weeds. So first things first, what is a weed? What's the definition? And is there some sort of botanical or scientific community that decides what is a weed versus what isn't a weed? The answer is no. It's all based on context. Basically, we get to decide. But if we were to ask Merriam-Webster, here's what she would say. A weed is a plant that is not valued where it's growing and is usually a vigorous growth, and especially one that tends to overgrow or choke out more desirable plants. And a very common definition is just a plant that's out of place. That means that weeds that are growing in your garden are only weeds because you don't want them in your garden. But if they're just growing out in nature and doing their thing, they're fine. They're just plants that have evolved well. They have learned to procreate well. They have learned to protect themselves well. And they have learned to pilfer nutrients like a pro. Ultimately, we decide what's a weed and what's not a weed. I might pick things that have a lot of really super beneficial uses, but they're so invasive that they're taking over my onions, and I'm not a fan of that. Some weeds are edible and are a legitimate food source, but that doesn't mean I want them taking over my tomatoes. You get my drift? So some weeds become really successful because they develop a really long taproot. A taproot, like a carrot or a parsnip, is a root that goes way down deep in the soil. And often that means it's very hard to get rid of. Other weeds like crabgrass have really shallow root systems and stay low to the ground and spread really well, which means that you're probably just going to mow right over it without actually destroying it. A win for the crabgrass. Many produce an absolute abundance of seeds, which means the seeds are going to spread everywhere all the time, almost out of your control. And those seeds are going to germinate quickly, and they can last in the soil for years until they are brought back to the light again. Weeds may be really good at protecting themselves. So there are weeds like thistle that have those ouchy thorns, which makes it so nobody actually wants to try to pick it. Others, like sticky weed, have a sap that it emits that when it gets on your skin, it's irritating, it's ouchy. So we might want to stay away from it. Weeds are also really great at sucking all the ingredients out of the soil. Because they're growing really fast, they need a lot of nutrients to get them up growing higher. That means they're taking those same nutrients away from the things that you really want to grow well. All in all, weeds are persistent little buggers. And while the feminist in me really loves that about them, the gardener in me feels like they can stay in their areas and I can have my areas. Let's talk about some examples that I got around here on the farm and that you might have in your gardens too. First, let's get started talking about a few examples of weeds with that long taproot. We're talking about burdock, we're talking about pokeweed, we're talking about thistle, and yes, even dandelions. I know, don't get angry yet, don't do angry texting. We'll talk about the dandelions, I promise. Now, burdock is a biennial plant, and if you're growing in the city, you may not ever see this or you may not have a problem with it. But if you have a garden and you live out in the suburbs, especially if you get deer in your garden and coyotes in the area, or if you live in the country like me, you might see burdock everywhere. This big old daddy is burdock. Holy bananas. It is huge, and I have it everywhere. And I have honestly been trying religiously to get rid of it since I have gotten here. And it seems like every spring we are getting more and more of it, that I get so busy with getting plants in the ground that I can't get to the weeds right away. And it's like before I know it, they're just huge and ginormous. We're going to get to the taproot, but first of all, let's talk about these leaves. Like, are you kidding me? So in addition to having a super long and tough taproot, it has these big, enormous leaves, which do a great job of shading out anything good that might be growing underneath those leaves. The stalks themselves are super thick and kind of look like celery. The stalks and the roots of burdock are edible, although typically I think you see it more in Asian cuisine. Personally, while I would be interested in trying it at some point and preparing it for myself, it's still my enemy here on the farm, and I'm much more interested in getting rid of it than I am in using it for a food source. Burdock is biennial, so this year it grows all of its big leafy structure. Next year, it's actually going to form its flower and go to seed. If you can handle keeping the burdock under control at this stage of its development, it never goes to seed. That means that this particular plant won't spread if I can keep it from going to seed. However, burdock, pokeweed, thistle, and dandelions can all regrow themselves from their taproot. So let's just say, for example, you're not somebody who wants to get in the ground. You don't want to dig weeds out of the ground. You just kind of want to mow over them and let them go. You can totally do that. You can mow over the burdock and just deal with it that way. No big deal, no problem. As long as you keep it from going to seed, it's not going to spread just on its own. And then, of course, when it does actually go to flower, now you've got a problem because now it is noxious. Noxious means that it can be harmful to animal or human health. Have you ever used anything with Velcro? Yes, I'm sure you have. Burdock was the inspiration for Velcro because when the flower is fertilized, that round, spiky burr, that seed head, can get stuck on everything. If you've ever tried to get it out of your dog's fur, you know exactly what I am talking about. It's horrible. It sticks to everything, which means it spreads really easy, especially on the coats of animals like deer and coyote and fox, who might be traveling alongside it often. And that's why you can get it in the suburbs. Let me dig up some burdock for you and you can see that taproot I'm talking about. So I'm popping over to this little section, which really should be a rain garden at some point, but at the moment is just completely overrun with weeds. It's just out of control. It's hard to believe that I cleared all of this out last year. Here's a lovely burdock. Let's just start digging. And I'm going to try to see how much of the taproot I can actually dig out before it breaks off. Because that's really the key. If you could theoretically get the entire taproot out, then you will have stopped the plant from growing back. The problem with that approach is the roots themselves of the burdock, and you'll see the same thing with the pokeweed, are full of water. They are full and tight with water, which means they're going to crack and burst easily. So as you're digging, as careful as you might be, the minute that you hit it with your shovel or the minute that you pull a little too hard trying to wiggle it out of the ground, whoop, there you go, breaks right off in your hand. And now you're stuck because you still have no idea how much farther down that taproot goes. And look how big the hole is getting. And I'm still not to the end of the taproot. And this is now actually going underneath the roots to the lilac tree, which is right next to it. And that's another thing that gets tricky about these deep taproots. They get intertwined with all of the other root structures that are deep under the soil, making them even harder to get out on their own. Just for funsies, I did another hole over here just to show you. I had to dig about a foot down, just to get a good handle on that root, and I still broke it off. Still broke off right in my hand. So all in all, while burdock is edible and has some wonderful benefits and certainly contributes greatly to the food system out there for the animals and birds out there, it is absolutely not helpful here in my garden where I want to grow things. So burdock is something for me that I need to get rid of and work hard on it. In addition, when getting rid of any weeds, I am personally one who does not use herbicides. I don't find them necessary. We're already way over destroying the planet. We don't need to keep adding chemicals into the ground. My first recommendation for getting rid of burdock is to try and dig as much of it out as you can. And then in that hole you just created, plant something beneficial to try to stop that root system from regrowing itself. If you're not somebody who can get on the ground or do digging easily and want to get rid of it, take out your weed whacker and just keep weed whacking it. You will at least stop the spread, and you will keep those leaves from getting big and shading out the positive things you want in your garden. Let's move on and talk about pokeweed. Look at this. Look at this bananas root. Like burdock, this is going to go way down deep into the ground. But like I'm telling you, it even has like rings. It is so fibrous. I think you could whittle it. You could whittle it. It's just nonsense. So pokeweed grows a little bit differently. It has longer, more oval shaped leaves, and it grows really, really tall. Can get up to like 6 to 8 feet tall if you just let it go. In addition to that taproot, which is going to keep it coming back every single year after year after year after year, it's got a different procreation method. This is going to get really tall, and then it's going to produce a dark purplish red berry. Like the burdock, while some parts of the pokeweed are actually edible, like the stalks and the leaves, if they are prepared properly, the berries and the root systems are toxic to humans, dogs, livestock, things like that. So it's just not really something you want around. The only people who really love pokeweed are the berries that like to come in for the birds, which is how they procreate so very successfully. Thank you, birds. When the pokeweed eventually dies off in the fall, it's very notable because these stalks are really thick. And this is like a young plant, right? This is a really young plant, but this is a really thick stalk. And when they die back, they kind of look like skeleton arms that sort of fall down to the ground. My first year here on the farm, this was everywhere. It was surrounding the black walnut tree and all around almost every single fence. I worked really hard to dig a lot of pokeweed out of the ground. And in some areas I was kind of successful, and it hasn't really come back in a way that I couldn't easily just kind of hack it down again, right? However, when I started taking out all those big pokeweed plants, it opened up a lot of sun to all the other cool roots that were hanging out in the soil. So a whole bunch of burdock kind of had a chance to grow up and thrive, and a whole lot of sticky weed too. And now it's still coming back. It's like the burdock, it's just going to go and go and go and go and go forever, forever. Pokeweed also has one additional defense. It produces a sap that is an irritant to the skin. So when you touch it, see how like I'm just touching it with bare hands? Yeah, I mean, maybe don't do that. It'll give you just a little bit of dermatitis, a little bit of a rash. Pokeweed itself doesn't seem to affect my skin all that badly. Sticky weed really does, and the burdock does, but this one not quite so much for me. But it's still worth wearing sleeves and gloves when you pull it. And just like burdock, the only way that you're going to get rid of it, if you get rid of it at all, is to dig as much of this bad boy root out of the ground as you possibly can. And then you can try to plant something on top of it to keep it perhaps from coming back so strong. You can also just mow it or weed whack it like you do with the burdock or whatever else, just to keep it from growing up. I'm right down by the black walnut tree, and right here in this very spot underneath the soil are a number of different pokeweed roots. They haven't come up in years because I just keep mowing over them. They're just in a space that I mow regularly, so they don't poke their way out of the ground. But as soon as I stop mowing, those bad boys are going to start reaching up through the ground again. I just know it's going to happen. Let's move right along to thistle. Thistle are annoying, not just because of their taproot. Thistles are annoying because they have thorns. Yikes, they are very ouchy. They are ouchy to humans, to dogs, to animals, the whole thing. It's a huge defense system for the thistle. I gotta tell you something. This is all my fault. This is all my fault what I'm about to tell you. Okay, so the first 2 summers here, I found very little to no thistle at all around my property. It's all burdock and pokeweed. The end of last summer, a thistle started growing up in onion patch after all the onions were done and gone. And you know what? It just grew so fast. I just kind of left it to see what it would do, because I also happen to know that bees, especially bumblebees, love thistle for the nectar and the pollen. And I thought, who am I? Who am I to judge? Let's just let this one grow up. The flower it produces is gorgeous. It's a beautiful dark pink. So I let this big, beautiful thistle just grow, and indeed the bees loved it, and it's pretty, and it's beautiful. This summer, I have thistle everywhere. everywhere. And because it is so beneficial to pollinators, it is the kind of thing that I would love to be able to let grow if they weren't so damn ouchy. I walk around in the lawn in my bare feet a lot. My doggos walk around with obviously no shoes on. Like, it's a hazard to us working in around the property to have it. So I've learned my lesson. I am going to get rid of as much of it as I can. However, I did go ahead and purchase a beautiful perennial, which is a thistle variety. I forgot the name. It just flew right out of my menopause brain. I'm going to put it up on the screen here when I edit this. But it produces a beautiful blue flower that the pollinators will love just as much, but it doesn't have all of the super duper ouchy thorns. That's the kind of thistle I want in my garden. Thistles are a problem again because they have the long taproot. But what makes thistles even more complicated about their taproot is it's not necessarily one super huge thick taproot like we see with the burdock and the pokeweed. Instead, lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of skinny taproots wiggle their way everywhere. Thistle grows easily in cracks in the sidewalk, in gravel driveways, in between pavers. Thistle does not care. It is going to get those skinny little taproots down wherever it can. And then it grows up into a big old plant that you don't want to take out because you don't want to poke yourself, right? So obviously, like the other weeds, we're going to wear sleeves, we're going to wear gloves, preferably a leather glove that's going to be harder for those thorns to penetrate. And if you try to grab it in between the leaf sets, just in the stalk, that's going to be a safer way to travel with the pokeweed when you're relocating it. Thistle is definitely going to be a common garden weed for just about everybody. Thistle is in the city, it is in the suburbs, it's in the country. Thistle is everywhere. Save your feet. Get rid of the thistle. Okay, wait. And last but not least, of course, we have to talk about dandelions. Remember when I said, don't do the angry typing, don't do the angry typing? Okay, let's talk about dandelions. Many of us do not consider dandelions to be a weed. I am a person who at one point in my life did consider dandelions to be, in fact, a weed. We are all a product of our environment and how we grow up. And sometimes until we learn better, we don't do better. So dandelions are relatively harmless in your lawn. Relatively harmless in your lawn. In fact, they're beneficial because they're some of the very first flowers in spring to pop up and give the bees a source of food. Yes, they have a very deep taproot, just like every other plant we've talked about. I'm going to show you this one tiny little dandelion. It's kind of new, kind of fresh. We're going to dig this out of the ground. And as you look at the root system, it's not super well developed yet. It's just like a little tiny baby dandelion. But let me pop over to Potato Palace and let me show you a really well-established dandelion colony. I'm going to start pulling away the tops of the stems so we can get sort of a clear vision on where it goes deep down into the ground. And as I'm doing this, this is bringing another great point to mind. All of these weeds, they are beneficial in ways to the ecosystem that we don't always see. As I pull back the stalks, there are snails under here. There are mushrooms growing under here. Those are all very important things to have in a healthy ecosystem. And so when we take out those weeds, we're also destroying a part of that very vulnerable ecosystem, right? That's another great reason to just leave them where they lay. But as I stick my handy dandy weeder down into the hole, look at this root that comes out of it. It is thick, it's chunky, just like the other root systems. It broke off super easy. It would be really difficult to fully remove this entire dandelion from the soil so that it never comes back. Personally, to me, I don't think it's worth getting rid of dandelions. I don't touch them. I don't care. I actually think they're really beautiful. I just let them go whole hog. But I do understand why they are classified as a weed because they are proliferate. You know what it's like to be a kid and go and blow all those seeds just float on the air. I mean, that is genius procreation, quite frankly. And if you have ever mowed your lawn and saw dandelions pop up like 4 hours later, you know exactly how fast they can regrow themselves. They have a broadleaf structure that funnels nutrients right down into those really hardy taproots. They make a great weed. So I'm going to highly recommend leave the dandelions in your lawn alone. They're really not hurting anybody. Yay, dandelions. Let's move on and talk about some weeds that have a very different root structure, a very shallow root structure. Some of you may be wondering what the actual benefit is of having a weed with a very shallow root structure. It might seem like counterproductive, like what's holding it there in the soil. And the benefit to having a very shallow root structure is availability of nutrients and water. If you've got two plants and one has roots just right on top of the soil, and the other has roots that go way kind of down deep in the ground. When the rainfall comes down and saturates the soil, those with shallow leaves get first crack at the water and the nutrients that are available right there at the surface. Whereas something with a longer, deeper root structure sort of has to wait a little bit for all of that water to seep down into the soil. So it allows the plant to grow quicker and grow faster because it is sucking up all that water and nutrients, skimming it right off the surface. And there's a number of different weeds that operate this way. The first one we're going to talk about is sticky weed or cleaver, but we'll also talk about crabgrass, which I know makes a lot of you crazy too. And although we won't go into it with like a ton of depth, creeping Charlie is another one that falls into this category. But let's talk about cleavers, because right now they're absolutely the bane of my existence here. I have bales of sticky weed all over this property, even more so than in years past, because as I have worked to get rid of burdock and pokeweed, sticky weed just like flourished up in its absence. So sticky weed has really shallow roots, which means it's super easy to pull out. And honestly, if it's grown a little bit taller, you don't even need to like bend and stoop to pick it up, because just grabbing it towards the top, giving it a light pull is going to pull it right free from the ground. What makes sticky weed super annoying is what makes it sticky. It actually emits a sap that is sticky to the touch and also a bit of a skin irritant. I definitely know when I've been weeding sticky weed because I get kind of just a light bumpy rash up my forearms. Generally, it's just for the day. I put a little salve on it. We call it a day. But it is definitely another one where you want to wear sleeves and gloves when you handle it. Sticky weed is honestly, of all the weeds, it's a pretty easy one to keep in control if you can get it out of the ground before it goes to seed. Where we are at right now on my property, the sticky weed has just gone crazy, but it hasn't gone to seed quite yet. It is just starting to flower. Once it has flowered, it is going to produce a tiny little seed ball that is also sticky, which means just like the burdock, it's going to catch on your clothes, your skin, animal fur, feathers from birds, and it gets carried absolutely everywhere. So it is fantastic at reproduction. In addition, as sticky weed grows, because it's sticky, it sticks to anything that's around it. So all of a sudden, a tree becomes a trellis. Burdock becomes a trellis. Pokeweed becomes a trellis. In fact, sticky weed will even trellis along each other, supporting each other as they continue to grow up. Now, I do understand that there's a lot of medicinal value to cleaver or sticky weed. I call it sticky weed. You can call it cleaver. Whatever we want to do is cool. So I do understand that some people make teas from it. Some people make extracts from it. So lots of benefits, but I don't need bales and bales and bales around my property. I'm happy if a little bit of it grows out in the pasture. I don't need this where I'm planting my tomatoes and the grapes and the onions and the peppers and the whole shebang. So let's see if we can clear some of the rain garden of the sticky weed. This is a method of removal that I have not tried yet. I'm told you can take yourself a rake, one like this, or one with like the hard iron, kind of larger claws, stick it in there, twist it around, and like pull out a bunch at one time. So let's see if that is something that will work. Maybe I'm getting greedy. Oh my gosh. Oh! Okay, I get where it's coming from, but this is not the rake for it. Let me go get the iron rake and I'll be right back. Let's try this one instead. It has a broken handle, which I haven't fixed yet, but I think that'll be okay for this purpose. Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes, that is the point. That easy. Hardly pulled at all. Just a little rake and a tug. Let's see how much else. Hey, buddy. Oh my goodness. Look at that. Just with like hardly any effort at all. Yes. This is the way to go. Woo. Okay, that was kind of fun and super satisfying. In just those few minutes, all of that got raked out. Kind of almost rolls itself into nice little bales. I didn't have to step over or into any other weeds to get it done. And already it has opened up so much. Now, once I get all that out of the way, I can see that it's mostly mudwort in here, which is also super invasive. Geez Louise, don't plant it unless it's in a pot. And the burdock. Okay, that was great. I'm glad we tried this together today because I'm going to do that to the absolute rest of my property. Now, if this was just a couple of stems that I'm pulling here and there, I generally do a chop and drop with my weeds, meaning I just let them lay on the lawn because I know they're going to dry out, and when I come and mow later, they're going to get all chopped up within. I don't care about weeds growing up in my lawn. I don't really care about having a nice lawn. I care about making spaces for flowers and food and other herbs and things like that. So sticky weed is awful, but on a scale of all the weeds, kind of an easy one to get rid of. Let's roll right into talking about crabgrass then. And I got to admit, I don't have much of it here. In fact, I had to loop the property a couple of times to try to look for it. And back a couple weeks ago when I was cleaning out Tomato Terrace, I had one glorious crabgrass plant, and I didn't even think to save it. I had just chucked it, thinking I would find crabgrass everywhere here, but I don't. But I know it's a bigger problem for a lot of folks who live in the city. Back at my city house, I always got a lot of crabgrass, especially in the cracks of the sidewalk or the cracks of your driveway. It also tended to grow where the harder sections of my lawn were, the places where it got dried out the most, which makes sense because a lot of those shallow rooted plants are well suited for super dry areas because they do collect whatever little water falls right at the surface. Crabgrass is a shallow rooted structure of a grass which grows directly out from a center point. And the stalks of the grass kind of lay along the ground and they look just like crab legs, hence the name. Crabgrass is really hard to get rid of because it's so low to the ground that when you mow your lawn, you just roll right over it. In fact, mowing over your crabgrass is a really great way to spread the crabgrass seed. What crabgrass is also super good at is procreation. It produces thousands of seeds that can last years lying dormant in the soil, just waiting for their shot, you know? And anything can spread those seeds. The wind can spread them, birds can spread them, and your lawnmower. Imagine having a blade whirring like this, pushing air real fast, and you mow over a chunk of crabgrass that is in seed, and all of a sudden, whoosh, you have spread that crabgrass seed all across your lawn. Yeah. So again, I know a lot of people like to spray for crabgrass. I'm going to gently encourage you not to. If I find crabgrass in my flower beds, in my tomato plants, anywhere that I am growing something that I really want to produce, I will remove any crabgrass that I find. Because if you've ever tried to remove crabgrass, you'll know that as those stalks push out, they almost create a bare circle underneath where nothing else can grow. So when you remove it, you've now got a bare circle of dirt where literally anything can just easily fill its place. So I am going to recommend either hand pulling or hand digging it out, covering it with mulch, or covering it with cardboard or something like that to sort of suppress it from going to seed. It's also easily something you could use a weed remover for. I think sometimes they're called grandpa's weeders or grandma's weeders, but it's a weeder on a long pole. So you don't even have to get down on the ground. You can just place the pole over the crabgrass, push down on a little lever, and it's going to suck the crabgrass right out of the ground. Those are cool little tools. I might like one someday, you know, just in case. Anyway. And then real quick, while we're at it, I know everybody has got Creeping Charlie. This is Creeping Charlie. I don't care about Creeping Charlie. I just really don't at all. I never cared if it was in my lawn. In fact, this Creeping Charlie is blooming, and I really think the flowers are lovely, to be honest. But a super shallow root structure, really easy to pull out or even rake up. This is one of those items that I would remove from my garden if it was truly preventing something else from growing healthy. But if it's in a lawn or just along the side of a driveway or something like that, I just let it go. That's just me. So you may have noticed as we have talked about all these different examples of weeds, I repeatedly say, don't spray it, don't spray it, just dig it, just pull it, just whatever. That's the kind of gardener I am. I just really am not interested. I'm not interested in using my budget to spend on herbicides that are going to kill that stuff back. I am not interested in damaging the ecosystem of the soil. I am not interested in those chemicals getting into my groundwater. That's me. I don't judge. Do what you got to do. I also understand that not everybody's body functions in all the same ways, right? At the moment, I can still get in the dirt and pull stuff out by hand. In fact, I kind of like it. I find it very satisfying. Not everybody's body performs that way, and that's totally cool. Thankfully, there's a lot of different weeding tools that you can use, like the grandpa's weeder. You can use a rake, or you can try to prevent the weeds in the first place by using a wood chip mulch or poly cover. Let's talk about that next. We've talked about what weeds are. We've talked through a number of examples and even removed some. Let's talk about weed prevention. So first of all, weeds are not necessarily going to be a problem for everybody in every climate all year long. I know weeds can seem really overwhelming at this time of year. I'm there too, but weeds tend to be the biggest issue in the spring, right? We get all those April showers, and since weeds are so good at sucking up water and nutrients and growing real fast, that's their time to shine. So if as growers we can get to pulling those weeds early in the spring, then as the season goes on and things dry out, you're gonna see less weed growth, and it's gonna feel a lot easier to maintain throughout the season. In addition, year after year, you're going to see that it's easier to keep weeds under control if you're someone who's actively out there, making sure you get them pulled in the spring. Maybe you're using planting techniques to help prevent them. If you're able to stay on top of the weeds, you're going to see a lessening in weeds year after year after year. Because the more that you remove roots from the soil, the more that you prevent weeds from going to seed. You're going to reduce the amount of seeds in the soil. You're going to remove a lot of the root structures that are keeping them going. So over time, if you keep at it, managing the weeds does get a lot easier. And even though currently I am completely overwhelmed by weeds here at the farm, and there's so many places here I'm battling, I can see that just my own presence, pulling weeds, using mulch, is making the property better over time. It's getting easier for me out here to maintain weeds as the years go by. In addition to mulch and weed barriers, you may have some areas on your property where you just have a ton of weeds and you want to just choke them out. You can grab an old sheet of plywood or an old piece of steel, maybe left over from a roofing project, and you can just place it on top of an area that you know has a huge weed problem and essentially just choke them out completely. If you do that in the spring and you lift up the board, you're likely to see bare ground underneath because nothing's going to come up at all. So that's another prevention technique that you can use that doesn't have to be something permanent in your garden. A tarp, you could also use a tarp to do the same thing. Okay, so now let's talk about the mulch versus weed barrier issue. Well, the purpose of mulch isn't only to prevent weeds. In some ways, the two have a lot of similarities. Both work to prevent weeds by light suppression. So when you pile a bunch of mulch on top of a flower bed, you are preventing the sunlight from reaching the soil, activating those seeds that are in the soil underneath. Weed barrier works exactly the same way, but instead of 3 to 4 inches of wood mulch that you might normally use, you're buying a roll of plastic at the store, and you're using that to suppress the light from activating the seeds. Both actively help keep moisture in the soil. They prevent so much evaporation, meaning when it rains, the rain will soak down underneath the mulch that'll get underneath the weed barrier. And then as the day heats up and it dries, that moisture doesn't have an easy path to evaporate back into the air. Despite what you may think, they both have environmental aspects that we should talk about. So when we talk about using mulch as a weed suppression technique, most commonly people are going to be using things like wood chips. I know since I got here on the farm, I get to use Soil Allen's big old wood chipper when he drops it off. I can make my own wood chip mulch, which is amazing. And that's a really big benefit to me being here, having this property and having so much just like free wood to take down and shove through the shredder. But it's also readily available to purchase. I mean, gas stations will put bags of mulch out, right? Grocery stores will put bags of mulch out. All of your big box stores will put bags of mulch out. So it's a very easy resource to put your hands on. Now, weed barrier fabrics may not be as easy to put your hands on because I can't create that here at home, but it's easy to order, right? Again, lots of stores carry. You can find weed barrier in all sorts of different qualities and thicknesses and widths and roll size and the whole thing. When you're using the mulching method, one of the downsides for some people is how much mulch you really have to use. Wood chips, for example, move. They can move when it rains too hard. They can move because an animal scrapes through it. They can move because you dragged your shovel through it. And disruption of the coverage of the mulch can let more light in, causing more weeds to grow. So when you're using mulch, you really have to use a lot. 3 to 4 inches is the recommended length of mulch, which to some of you might seem like absolutely crazy, right? Whereas weed barrier, you generally only have to roll it out once. Maybe you double it up for a little extra protection and put 2 layers out there. But it's less material by volume that you have to use. When it comes to the soil health, mulch definitely has the benefit. Mulch is typically made of wood products and bark and things like that, whereas weed barrier is made of plastic. Wood mulch comes from an organic source. Weed barrier comes from plastic. And so if you're somebody who doesn't want to encourage a lot of plastic use in your life, weed barrier poses a problem for that. That does not mean the wood mulch doesn't have its own sustainability issues. If you're purchasing wood mulch from a manufacturer, it's probably going to come in a big old plastic bag, right? Maybe you don't end up using quite as much plastic as you do with the rolls, but it still comes in a plastic bag. In addition, so some mulch manufacturers might get their wood resources from, let's say, landscapers who have just tons of debris left over from projects that they can sell off to mulch manufacturers. But it also could come from grinding down pallets that have been used commercially. Yeah, a lot of mulch manufacturers buy used pallets from the shipping industry and they grind them down into mulch. And you might say, yeah, hey, cool, man. Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? Yeah, yes, to a point. They're not clogging up landfills. It's an organic source going back into the soil. But a lot of those pallets are also chemically treated wood. And you don't necessarily know what they were carrying and what organisms and chemicals may have come from whatever was stacked on top of it. So mulch is on its own is not necessarily the climate saver that some folks might think it is. In fact, if you're someone who does have to purchase the large bags of mulch, you might want to look more deeply into the manufacturer that you're purchasing from and find out where they get their wood resources from. If it's coming from landscaping companies, for example, and it's a lot of wood bark and it's just a lot of things from down trees. I know in my old city in Wisconsin, the city picked up branches and like that for you. They ground it down into mulch and it was a free resource for community members to just drive over and scoop up and get free mulch. Those systems I think are amazing. I would be more concerned if the mulch was chemically treated or if it came from a chemically treated source, because then you have no idea what's in it and you don't know what's going to be leaching into the ground around your plants. So from an actual productivity scale, how does weed barrier compare to mulch? About the same. I know for a lot of folks that sounds kind of crazy that they might be about the same. Weed barrier fabric will fail. It's going to fail. Whether it fails in the first month, whether it fails 2 months after, your weed barrier is going to fail. You could spend all day covering your nice big garden plot in rows and rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of weed barrier. And it might look clean, it might look great, but eventually over time, your plant material is going to fall to the ground. You're going to trip somewhere, or you're going to have a shovel that accidentally dings the surface, and weeds and grass will immediately grow up into any open space. At the edges, you'll find that soil will collect over the edges in particular, and grasses will start growing over the top of your weed mulch. And anytime you get organic material on top of that weed barrier, that just creates a ripe environment for more weeds to grow. In addition, mulch benefits the soil because those wood chips are going to break down. They are going to improve your soil structure, especially if you're somebody who has heavy clay soil. Adding organic matter to any soil environment is going to make the soil better. Weed barrier is not going to improve your soil. In fact, some might say that weed barriers actually damage the quality of your soil underneath because you are preventing it from getting oxygen, from getting nutrients. You may find that you have to use more fertilizers, for example, when you have weed barrier cloth, because not as much nutrients is being replaced back into the soil from organic sources. Either way, both can go a long way towards weed prevention. And if that gets you happier in the garden and more time focusing on the plants and not the weeds, nay number one, like the fonts. I don't know what I'm doing now. Whatever gets you outside, whatever gets you growing, I am supportive of. I am not going to judge one method over the other. Personally, for me, right here on my property, I have access to a very natural wood resource. I will continue to use wood mulch. I am just not a fan of putting more and more and more plastic consumption out into the world. I'm trying to reduce it, even if it means I have to spend a little bit more time weeding. But we're not all in the same boat. We don't all have the same growing areas. We don't all have the same intents and bodies and all that good stuff. So you got to make the decision that's right for you. Both will get you where you want to go. You just have to decide if the consequences either way are worth it for you. That's it. Let's pop over to my herb garden area. We're right here in front of the grapevines. This area was completely chock full overrun with pokeweed, burdock, mugwort, sticky weed before I got here. Last year was the first year that I got to use the wood chipper, that I really got a chance to prune a lot of the property. And once I wood chipped this area, it has really done a pretty good job of keeping it fairly weed free. Now, certainly I've been weeding a little bit as I have been planting this spring. I still have burdock coming up right here. We've got creeping Charlie. I think there's some nightshades. Oop, there's a pokeweed that we need to get rid of right there. So weeds are definitely still here, and I will put manual labor into removing them. But this is that year to year to year improvement that I was talking about. This area is already better and easier and more weed free than it was before I started using the mulch. This is potato land, totally overgrown, completely. Lots and lots and lots of grass coming up. But old Cheryl had been a big fan of weed barriers. I can tell you it didn't help her very much, but she had a couple rolls left, and you can kind of tell right here I did indeed use the weed barrier because I wanted to see what kind of a difference it could make. Now you can tell just right there in that stripe, you can tell that it has slightly less weeds than where just the straw, the ground was sort of open. But it is definitely not weed and grass free. Now, part of that is because then I did put wood chips down over the top of the weed barrier because I felt like I wanted something sort of to protect the weed barrier from like my feet and my shovel and my hoe, you know, from poking holes in it. I think a lot of people do that or give that a try. It just doesn't work that well. And over time, it's just going to create more organic matter that then turns into more weeds, grasses, what have you, that you don't want to use. Back at the city house, cutie neighbor on one side asked me for help one summer because she really wanted to grow flowers. She really wanted to like make the outside of her house really pretty. And of course I said, heck yes, sure, let's do it. So we came up with a plan. We bought some perennials, some annuals, the whole thing. Then she came home on the day we were going to do the project. She came home with these huge rolls of weed barrier and then huge bags of black mulch. That was really the look she was going for, black mulch against her gray house. And so we did all the work, right? We did all the work. We pulled out the old weed barrier. We churned the soil. We put the holes in the fabric to then plant the plants in. And it probably looked good and weed-free for, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks. And then just life happens. Life happens, right? Water got in under one corner, kind of lifting up the weed barrier. Grass start pushing out everywhere. Over on another end, an animal kind of scuffled, probably looking, digging for something, tore a couple holes in the weed barrier, and then weeds and stuff grow in. And once they start growing up through those holes, they kind of push the plastic to the side. They don't care that the plastic is there. They're going to get up towards that sun however they can. So mulch alone isn't going to prevent every weed. Weed barriers alone, though, are also not going to prevent every weed. Just stuff to keep in mind as you're making your choices around your garden. Hilda gets the chance to say goodbye today. She's never in the big, long videos. I hope this was helpful. I hope you had a great time. I hope you learned a thing or two about weeds and how you might want to manage them in your own gardens. If you didn't and you just like to hang out because we're kind of fun, super cool for me. Do what you got to do, friends. I am thankful to all of my subscribers. I am thankful to all of my members. I just really love doing this. I love creating content and I love hanging out with you in your gardens too. Right? I think you're smiling. I love it. Have a most wonderful rest of your day. We're going to talk to you real soon, okay? Love you. Bye.